So for this week's Fader Friday, I want to talk about how do you get in and out of a console. So most consoles are fed by digital audio workstations these days, but a lot of younger kids think that DAWs and interfaces in general are typically 8-channel affairs. You can get multi-channel interfaces that can be up to 32 channels, and you can chain them together so that you have, much larger systems, as I think a lot of people know. You typically have the line input feeding the input of the desk coming from your DAW's output. So in each individual channel that you would want to use on the desk, you'd have them feeding instead of 1 and 2 on your Pro Tools rig or your stereo bus on your Pro Tools rig. You'd have 1 coming out here and 2 and 3 and 4. And how it works in this room in particular, I have 3 8-channel interfaces that handle this side of the desk. A1 through 8, B1 through 8, C1 through 8. And then over here, we have a 16-channel interface that handles this because this is a 16-channel bucket. These are stereo channels. Getting back into the console is a completely different situation. And if you're mixing, you may just patch this into your Pro Tools rig, or you may patch the output of your stereo bus straight into a 2-channel high-end converter, something like the Lavry or the Metric Halo or the Prism. There's a lot of different options that people use. Burl is very popular right now, but that comes down to personal preference on how you want to capture your mix bus out of your console. When you're feeding back in from the console into Pro Tools, you're typically doing that in 2 ways. You're either going to do that through the buses and have your buses patch into the inputs of Pro Tools, or you're going to have your direct outputs patch into the inputs of Pro Tools. And on a console like this, they're actually the same thing. The direct output for each individual channel is actually literally the bus output of that channel. They come through these group knobs, so they're actually labeled group outputs on the desk. So if I use direct output 1, it disables group output 1 on all of these channels, and now this channel feeds directly straight into my converters. If I were to not use direct and press the button, then any of these could also feed back into that converter. But if I'm trying to feed in, I tend to try and do it individually as possible in this particular room. But in a tracking situation, you may want to group some stuff, and on older consoles, you may not have all of these particular features. So let's go in there and we'll talk about those in the other studios. So here we are with our vintage API legacy console, and on this console, how we typically have everything fed is from our direct inputs going straight into Pro Tools. So our buses are utilized for other things, feeding a completely different interface, which we have over here, a Metric Halo that is set up for other producers to use, to group things together. Say we want to record our toms going through a sonic maximizer as well as the individual tom tracks. We can send them down a bus and pair them together. Say we want to have a bunch of guitar microphones go down one equalizer into Pro Tools. We can do that up here. But if you want the individual tracks, the direct outputs from this desk are already routed straight into the Pro Tools rig, and you'd have to patch these groups. A lot of studios that you'll go into, the groups are what actually feeds into the Pro Tools rig, and that makes a lot of sense because that's what originally fed the multi-track tape machines. On this particular console, what's nice about it is that the direct output is independent of the group. So on the SSL, it's a one or the other sort of situation, where here you have your direct output running independently and all of your grouping. So say you had, a Royer and a 57, you could run them each through their direct output and then press them down the same bus and record them individually as well, which is, also 100% possible on the SSL. You just need to use a different group output to be able to do it. So, very flexible here, but let's go talk about a desk that's a little bit less flexible. So this is our vintage Angus console. And this console, as you can see, does have group outputs. It has 8 of them, but it also has no direct outputs that are featured in the desk. That being said, you can get direct outputs and patch from each individual channel. You don't want to be able to just record 8 of these at once, or all of these going to an 8-channel interface, you would like to be able to record 18 channels at once, right? Well, there's a couple spots where you can grab them from. You can grab them from the equalizer out, which will go ahead and be post this 500 series bucket, or you can grab them from the fader out right there, and that'll be post this fader. So really, it's one of those things where you've got to patch around and you've got to use your brain a little bit more. But if you know where you're going and what you're trying to accomplish, an old desk like this can be just as flexible as something like the Legacy. So that wraps up getting in and out of consoles. And if you have any more questions, please let us know. I hope that you can see why something like the SSL is so much more flexible than a console like the Legacy or the Angus. But just because you don't have these features built into every console that you come across doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to get the desk to do what you want to do in most situations. And in some situations, like the direct output utilizing the group amplifier situation that you have going on in the SSL, something like the Legacy's output situation is a little bit more flexible for tracking. So I hope that helps. And if you have any questions, please let us know, and we will talk to you soon. Have a good day.